Hey everyone, I'm your author June. Before we get started, I really would appreciate it if everyone could hit the subscribe button. It helps me grow the channel, and I would love for all of you to come on this journey with me, as a family. Now, let's get into the story. Let me know if you enjoy. The sun blazed, each ray a scalding brand on Jack Rayner's shoulders, bearing down on the self-imposed isolation that clung to him like dust. He fought with the shattered remains of a fence post, the wood a jagged memorial to the land's relentless nature. From afar, the murmur of Harmony Creek wafted in stray sounds of gaiety, the rumble of passing wagons, the dissonant honky-tonk from the saloon. He purposefully shut it out, a fierce rejection mirroring the force he used to ram posts into the unyielding ground. He preferred the solace of the prairie wind, the whisper of sage, the bovine chorus of his herd. They demanded nothing, offered no judgments. Sweat beaded on his brow, plastering dark strands to his skin, and he paused, swiping at it with a dirt-stained hand. His movements were spare, efficient, sculpted by years of demanding labor. He was a man forged from sun-baked earth and endless horizons, his physique honed and sinewy, his face a roadmap of weathered resilience. But look closely, beyond the stoic mask he presented, and you might glimpse a shadow in his depths, a sorrow that lingered, a grief that refused to fade. It was a vulnerability fiercely guarded, concealed behind a fortress of quiet reserve. He gripped the sledgehammer, its weight a familiar comfort. The resounding clang of metal against wood echoed across the plains, a steady rhythm against the backdrop of whispering grasses. Each impact was a muted act of defiance against the encroaching stillness, a testament to his existence in this remote corner of the world. As dusk began to bleed across the sky, painting it with strokes of flame and violet, Jack set out to survey his cattle. They grazed serenely in the tall grass, their forms silhouetted against the vibrant canvas of the horizon. He moved among them with a practiced calm, his presence a reassuring constant. He knew each creature intimately, their individual temperaments, their strengths and frailties. They were his responsibility, his sustenance, his only kin. He dismounted near a trickling spring, where the air hung heavy with moisture. Kneeling, he drank deeply, the water earthy and mineral-rich. Straightening, he spotted a young calf, separated and ensnared in a tangle of barbed wire. Panic shone in the animal's wide eyes. Jack approached with deliberate slowness, murmuring in a soothing cadence. The calf recoiled initially, then gradually relaxed as he drew nearer. He knelt beside it, carefully assessing the damage. The wire had bitten deep, and a whimper escaped the calf's throat. From his saddlebag, he retrieved a pair of wire cutters, his movements sure and deliberate. The only sounds were the snorts of the surrounding cattle, and the calf's occasional plaintive cry. Finally, with a careful maneuver, he freed the trapped limb. He inspected the wound, cleansing it with water from his canteen. It was a jagged laceration, but not critical. He applied a balm from his kit, then wrapped the leg with a strip of clean cloth. The calf tested its weight gingerly on the injured leg. Jack watched for a moment, ensuring it could bear weight. Then, with a gentle prod, he steered it back to the herd. He observed it rejoin its mother, a quiet feeling of fulfillment settling over him. It was a small thing, a simple act of compassion, yet it felt significant. He mounted his horse, turning back toward the ranch, the fading sunlight warming his face. The stillness remained, but its nature had shifted, less oppressive, less desolate. As he rode, he reflected on the calf's fear, its suffering, and its ultimate deliverance. He wondered if such freedom could ever be his. Back at the homestead, shadows deepened, and the air turned crisp. He ignited a kerosene lantern, its light casting spectral shapes on the rough-hewn walls. The cabin was sparsely appointed, furnished only with bare essentials: a cot, a table, the chair, a stove. A stark reflection of the man who inhabited it, unadorned, practical, and devoid of superfluous detail. He heated a tin of beans on the stove, the meager meal a familiar ritual. As he ate, he stared out the window, his gaze lost in the immensity of the night sky. Countless stars glittered in the void, each a distant beacon in an endless universe. He thought of his father, resting beneath a time-worn marker on a windswept knoll overlooking the ranch. He recalled his father's booming laughter, his work-worn hands, his unwavering belief in what was right. He remembered the day his father was stolen away, the silence that followed, the injustice left unaddressed. A surge of anger coursed through him, a familiar tightness in his chest. He clenched his fists, knuckles bone-white. He had vowed to bury it, to never allow the rage to consume him. But tonight, the quiet felt heavier than lead, a crushing burden that threatened to suffocate him. He finished his meal, cleaned his plate, and banked the fire in the stove. Then he stepped outside, drawn by the vastness of the night. He stood there for an eternity, listening to the wind's lament, watching the celestial dance, wrestling with the silence that had become his unwelcome companion. As the first faint blush of dawn touched the eastern horizon, he finally turned and re-entered the cabin. He knew another day of back-breaking labor awaited, another day of self-imposed quiet. But that night, something had begun to stir within him. A hairline fracture had appeared in the wall he had so carefully erected, a fragile flicker of hope in the enveloping darkness. And he knew, with a conviction that startled him, that the silence could not endure forever. A new dawn in redemption, the stagecoach groaned to a stop, a plume of ochre dust swirling around the undercarriage like a restless phantom. Eleanor Ellie Malone descended, her scarlet dress a bold stroke against redemption's drab palette. The lightweight wool, a St. Louis indulgence, danced in the gentle breeze, a stark contrast to the coarse fabrics worn by nearly everyone else. She adjusted her spectacles, sunlight flashing off the gold rims, and drew in a breath the air, gritty with dry earth and the faint tang of cattle. A small knot of townsfolk watched with mingled curiosity and apprehension. Ellie graced them with an open, welcoming smile. "Good afternoon. I'm Eleanor Malone, your new schoolteacher." Her voice, clear as a bell, resonated in the still air. A ripple of nods passed through the onlookers. A woman with a sun-baked face and world-weary eyes stepped forward. "Welcome to Redemption, Miss Malone. I'm Martha. I run the general store." "A pleasure, Martha," Ellie responded, offering her hand. Martha's grip was unexpectedly strong. A man in a battered Stetson, his face a roadmap of wrinkles earned through toil and hardship, touched the brim of his hat. "Jedediah, ma'am. I work at the livery." "Thank you, Jedediah. I appreciate the welcome." Ellie's gaze swept the crowd, seeking a flicker of warmth. Finding little outright hostility, she noted instead a guarded wariness that piqued and saddened her in equal measure. The town itself was underwhelming, a testament to hard times. A lone, parched street hosted a string of wooden buildings, some tilting precariously. The Last Chance Saloon appeared to be the most flourishing establishment. Children peered from behind their mothers, eyes wide with youthful curiosity. "Where might I find the schoolhouse?" Ellie asked, turning back to Martha. Martha gestured down the street. "Edge of town, past the blacksmith. Can't miss it. Though, miss, she added, her voice softening. "It ain't much to look at." "I'm sure it holds promise," Ellie replied, her optimism unshaken. "Everything does." She hefted her carpet bag, its weight a comforting constant, and started down the dusty thoroughfare, her crimson dress a vibrant flag against the muted landscape. The townsfolk tracked her progress, their silence a heavy cloak. The schoolhouse was in far worse shape than she'd imagined. Dilapidated felt like an understatement. The weathered planks of its construction were warped, some missing entirely. The windows, cracked and filthy, offered only a dim view of the interior. The roof sagged ominously, threatening collapse. Dust lay thick as a shroud. She pushed open the groaning door, and a wave of must and decay washed over her. Undeterred, Ellie crossed the threshold. A solitary, overturned desk lay forlornly in the middle of the space. Cobwebs hung like spectral draperies. Sunlight pierced through the shattered windows, spotlighting dust motes suspended in the air. She walked towards the back of the room, where a warped blackboard clung precariously to the wall. With a resolute sigh, she rummaged in her carpet bag, retrieving a piece of chalk. Taking a deep breath, she etched in bold script, "Redemption School, let knowledge shine." The chalk screeched against the uneven surface, the sound amplified in the otherwise silent room. Ellie stepped back, surveying her work. It was a humble beginning, but a beginning nonetheless. That evening, Ellie secured a room at the town's sole boarding house, managed by a kindly, if inquisitive, widow named Mrs. Higgins. The room, small and sparsely furnished, was nevertheless clean. After unpacking her modest belongings, Ellie descended for supper. The dining room hummed with quiet conversation. The townsfolk, their reserve still evident, offered polite nods as she entered. She took a seat at the end of a long table, beside a quiet man with work-roughened hands. "Good evening," she said, smiling. He looked up, surprised, and mumbled a greeting. Mrs. Higgins bustled about, serving steaming bowls of stew. Ellie sampled it cautiously. Bland, but nourishing. "So, Miss Malone," Mrs. Higgins began, setting a bowl before her. "What do you make of redemption so far?" Ellie chose her words carefully. "It's peaceful," she offered diplomatically. "Peaceful's good," a booming voice declared from the opposite end of the table. "Keeps trouble at bay." Ellie turned to see a burly figure with a thick mustache and a severe countenance. "Perhaps," she conceded. "But I also believe a little commotion, a little vitality, can be beneficial, particularly when it involves learning." The man grunted dismissively. "Learning ain't gonna fill no bellies." "Perhaps not directly," Ellie agreed. "But it can unlock opportunities, broaden horizons. It can illuminate the world in new ways." "The world's just fine as it is," the man countered. Ellie smiled, unruffled. "I disagree. I believe it can always improve." Silence descended upon the table. The man glared, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. Ellie returned his gaze, unflinching. She knew she was an outsider, an anomaly, but she was also determined to make a difference. The task would be daunting, but she was prepared. As supper concluded, a young girl, perhaps 7 years old, approached Ellie with shy hesitation, clutching a well-worn book. "Miss Malone," she whispered, "are you really going to teach us?" Ellie knelt, meeting the girl's gaze. "Yes, I am," she affirmed, her voice gentle. "I'm going to share everything I know." The girl's eyes widened with delight. "Can you teach me to read?" "Of course," Ellie said, smiling warmly. "That's the best place to begin." The girl's face lit up with radiant hope. "Thank you, Miss Malone," she said, and scampered back to her mother. Ellie watched her go, her heart swelling with renewed purpose. Redemption might be a sleepy, dusty town, but it was also a town with children. Children deserving of education, children deserving of opportunity. And Ellie Malone would provide it, even in the face of skepticism and resistance. She would breathe new life into that dilapidated schoolhouse, and she would bring knowledge and hope to the children of redemption. The path ahead would be challenging, but as she looked at the little girl, she knew it was a path worth treading. The seeds of change had been planted, and Ellie was resolved to nurture them, even in redemption's harsh terrain. An unspoken greeting the high noon sun hammered redemption, turning the parched main street into a wavering illusion. Ellie, fresh from a morning battling grime on the schoolhouse windows, emerged blinking, the sharp tang of lye soap still clinging to her. Shading her eyes, she'd hoped to see the promised delivery of lumber from the mercantile. Instead, a lone rider, a dark silhouette against the blazing light, commanded her attention. He held himself erect in the saddle, a wide-brimmed Stetson concealing his features. Even at this distance, an undeniable aura clung to him, a contained power that resonated like the heat rising off the baked earth. As the rider approached, she recognized the stark etchings on his face, the implacable set of his jaw. It was the taciturn man from the stagecoach stop, he of the curt nod and nothing more. Jack Rayner. He drew rein before the general store, his horse stomping and snorting in the dust. Only the creak of leather and the faint chime of spurs disturbed the quiet. Ellie experienced a jolt of something. Curiosity? Irritation? An unspoken challenge? Whatever the spark, it propelled her forward. The wooden planks of the boardwalk echoed softly beneath her worn boots as she approached. "Mr. Rayner," she called, her voice ringing clear in the lazy afternoon air. He turned, his gaze, the color of a twilit sky, meeting hers. The hat's shadow obscured his eyes, making his thoughts unreadable. He simply observed her approach, his silence almost a physical presence. "Good afternoon," Ellie pressed on, undeterred. "I'm Eleanor Malone, the new schoolteacher. We had a brief encounter at the stage stop." He touched the brim of his hat, a minimal gesture barely qualifying as a greeting. A single, almost imperceptible nod followed. "Miss Malone." His voice resonated, a low rumble akin to distant thunder, rough-edged as if rusted with disuse. Ellie halted a few feet away, close enough to discern the fine lines fanning out from his eyes, the sun-burnished hue of his skin. Handsome, undoubtedly, yet a palpable weight shadowed him, an aura of sorrow clinging like trail dust. "I just wanted to extend a welcome," she said, aiming for warmth. "Redemption may not be much, but I hope you find it suitable." He didn't answer immediately, his gaze traversing her, taking in her simple cotton dress, the pushed-up sleeves, the smudge of grime on her cheek. The assessment was brief, yet Ellie felt an unexpected heat flood her face. "Suitable enough," he finally replied, his tone devoid of warmth. Ellie refused to be dissuaded. "I'm trying to prepare the schoolhouse. It requires considerable effort, but I'm determined to make it a proper place for learning." She indicated the dilapidated building down the lane. His gaze followed, his expression unchanging. "So, I've heard. Perhaps you have children who will be attending?" she ventured, seeking common ground. His jaw clenched, a subtle tick. "No?" The word was clipped, final, like a slammed door. Frustration flickered within Ellie. He was deliberately shutting her out, erecting a barrier she suspected she couldn't scale even with persistence. But she was not one to be easily turned aside. "Well, I hope you'll consider supporting the school in other ways. Education is the lifeblood of any thriving community." He shifted in the saddle, his gaze sweeping towards the distant horizon. "My contribution would be received." The cryptic statement hung in the air, weighty with unspoken significance. Ellie frowned, perplexed. "I don't understand." He met her gaze once more, and for a fleeting instant she glimpsed something within his eyes, a hint of pain, perhaps a shadow of regret. But it vanished so quickly, she questioned its reality. "Irrelevant," he said, his voice flat and dismissive. He spurred his horse forward. "I have obligations." Ellie watched him depart, her hand rising instinctively as if to detain him, only to be quickly withdrawn. She watched him ride away, his broad back a silent testament to withheld stories. He dissolved into the swirling dust, leaving her isolated on the boardwalk, a whirlwind of questions stirring within her. What did he mean by ill-received? What was he concealing? And why did she feel this overwhelming urge to uncover it? She turned back toward the schoolhouse, the weight of her unanswered questions pressing upon her. The afternoon sun seemed to mock her optimism, painting elongated, distorted shadows across the dusty street. Despite his gruff exterior, despite his clear reluctance, Ellie couldn't dispel the notion that Jack Rayner was more than he presented. Beneath the rough facade, she sensed a depth, a complexity that ignited her curiosity. And she, Eleanor Malone, had never backed down from a compelling enigma. She resolved to unearth the secrets of redemption's taciturn cowboy. What inner demons plagued him? What truths was he guarding? And, perhaps most importantly, what would it take to hear him utter her name with something other than cool formality? She knew it would be an uphill battle, but as her gaze shifted from the ramshackle schoolhouse to the receding figure of Jack Rayner, a slow smile blossomed on her face. She had a premonition that her time in redemption was destined to become anything but dull. The longer could indeed wait. A glimmer of kindness, the dust swirled around Ellie's ankles as she walked back from the general store, the late afternoon sun painting the main street of Redemption in hues of orange and gold. She clutched a brown paper bag containing writing slates and chalk, her mind already formulating lesson plans for the week ahead. A high-pitched yelping broke through her thoughts, followed by the taunting laughter of children. Frowning, Ellie changed direction, drawn by the sound of distress. She rounded the corner of the saloon and saw them. 3 boys, no older than 10, circling a scrawny, dust-colored dog. They were pelting it with pebbles, their faces alight with cruel amusement. The dog, ribs showing through its matted fur, whimpered and cowered, its tail tucked between its legs. Ellie's stomach clenched. She was about to intervene when a figure detached itself from the shadows of the livery stable. It was him, Jack Rayner. He moved with a quiet purpose that sent the children scattering like startled birds. He didn't shout, didn't raise a fist. Instead, he knelt, his large frame somehow managing to appear gentle. His voice, when he spoke, was low and gravelly, but carried an undeniable authority. "Leave him be," he said, his eyes dark and unwavering as he fixed them on the retreating figures. "He's done you no harm." The boys, chastened, mumbled apologies and disappeared around the corner. Jack remained kneeling, his gaze softening as he turned his attention to the dog. He extended a hand slowly, palm up, allowing the animal to approach on its own terms. The dog hesitated, then crept forward, sniffing tentatively. Jack didn't move, didn't rush the encounter. Finally, the dog licked his hand. A ghost of a smile touched Jack's lips, barely perceptible, but Ellie saw it. He began to stroke the dog's head, his touch surprisingly tender. "Poor fella," he murmured, his voice a low rumble only the dog could likely hear. "Been through a rough patch, haven't you?" Ellie watched from the shadows, mesmerized. This was a side of Jack Rayner she hadn't seen. A stark contrast to the brooding, taciturn figure she'd encountered outside the schoolhouse. This man was capable of kindness, of empathy. He possessed a gentleness that seemed at odds with the hard lines of his face and the weariness in his eyes. He examined the dog carefully, running his hands over its ribs, checking for injuries. The dog, initially wary, now leaned into his touch, a low whine rumbling in its chest. Jack found a gash on its leg, cleaned it with water from his canteen, and tore a strip from his own bandana to bandage the wound. Ellie was struck by the practicality of his actions, the quiet efficiency with which he tended to the animal. As he finished bandaging the leg, Jack looked up, his gaze meeting Ellie's. She hadn't realized she'd moved closer. He didn't seem surprised to see her, but his expression closed off, the warmth she'd glimpsed moments before vanishing behind a wall of guarded indifference. "Miss Malone," he acknowledged, his voice flat. Ellie felt a flush rise in her cheeks, Pod observing him in this unguarded moment. "Mr. Rayner," she replied, trying to sound nonchalant. I saw what happened. That was kind of you." He shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "Just a dog." "Not just a dog," Ellie countered, stepping fully into the light. "A creature in need, and you helped him." He stood up, towering over her, the dog now nestled at his feet. "He'll likely wander off, find another town, another set of troubles." "Perhaps," Ellie conceded. "Or perhaps he'll find a home, someone to care for him." She looked directly at Jack, her gaze unwavering. "Perhaps he'll even find redemption." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Jack's eyes darkened, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them. He looked away, his jaw tight. "Don't go reading too much into things, Miss Malone," he said, his voice gruff. "Kindness ain't always what it seems." He turned to leave, the dog trotting obediently at his heels. Ellie watched him go, her mind racing. What did he mean by that? Was he suggesting that his act of kindness was somehow disingenuous? Or was he warning her not to be fooled by appearances? Not to assume that he was a good man based on a single act of compassion? As he reached the edge of town, Jack paused, looking back at her over his shoulder. The setting sun cast long shadows, obscuring his features, making it impossible to read his expression. He simply nodded curtly, then disappeared into the gathering dusk, the stray dog his only companion. Ellie stood there for a long moment. The image of him tending to the injured dog burned into her memory. She was more intrigued by Jack Rayner than ever. His gruff exterior and attempts to remain aloof only served to pique her curiosity further. She sensed a deep well of emotion hidden beneath his stoicism, a capacity for both pain and compassion, and she was determined to uncover the truth of who he was, regardless of the secrets he was trying to keep. The slates and chalk in her paper bag suddenly felt heavy, her mind no longer on lesson plans, but on the silent cowboy and the glimmer of kindness she had witnessed in his eyes. The town social, the Redemption Town social, hummed, a vibrant tableau of homespun fabrics and shy smiles beneath a canopy of lanterns, their glow challenged by the approaching night. Ellie, balancing a generous slice of Mrs. Henderson's celebrated apple pie, searched the throng, her gaze settling on a solitary figure near the hall's support post, Jack Rayner. He stood apart, an island of quietude amidst the bustling scene, his stillness amplified by the surrounding revelry. She edged through knots of chattering women and self-conscious teens, the mingled aroma of burning wood and strong coffee thick in the air. As she neared, conversation seemed to falter, voices dipping as eyes darted toward Jack, then hurriedly away. "Evening, Mr. Rayner," Ellie greeted, her tone bright, bordering on forced. He turned, his face an enigma. A fleeting emotion, unreadable, flickered across his features before settling back into its habitual reserve. "Miss Malone," he acknowledged, his voice a deep resonance that seemed to ripple through her. He straightened, pushing off the beam, yet remained rooted. Ellie extended the pie. "Mrs. Henderson declares this her masterpiece. Thought you might enjoy a taste." He hesitated, then accepted the plate, their fingers briefly meeting. An unexpected current, strangely jarring, surged up her arm. He mumbled thanks, his attention fixed on the dessert. "So," Ellie ventured, determined to breach his guarded demeanor, "how fares the ranch? This dry spell must be taxing for everyone." He sampled the pie, chewing deliberately before swallowing. "It's a ranch," he stated, finally meeting her eyes. "It's never effortless." Ellie stifled a sigh. She'd anticipated his taciturn nature, but this bordered on outright dismissal. "I imagine. My experience with ranches is limited. Back east, books were more my element." A nervous laugh escaped her. "Books have merit," he conceded, his tone even. "Indeed," Ellie concurred, casting about for a safer topic. "But so does the natural world. Have you always resided in Redemption, Mr. Rayner?" He tensed, his jaw hardening visibly. "Most of my years." "Did you grow up on the ranch?" She persisted, undeterred. She justified it as being for the town, for her students. Understanding Jack Rayner might help illuminate the spirit of redemption. A small, insistent voice hinted her motives weren't entirely altruistic. "Yes," the curt response signaled finality. Ellie noticed a cluster of men nearby, their hushed conversation punctuated by sidelong glances directed at her and Jack. Their gazes held a mixture of apprehension and veiled curiosity. She frowned, puzzled by their reaction. "It must be a beautiful place," she said, attempting to ignore the underlying tension. "I'd love to see it sometime." Jack's eyes narrowed, his expression unreadable. "It's merely land," he countered, his voice sharper now. "Earth, grass, and stock." "Everything is merely something," Ellie retorted, a spark of defiance igniting within. "But that doesn't negate its potential for beauty or significance." He regarded her then, a penetrating stare that unsettled her. A tremor traced her spine, despite the evening's warmth. "Some things are best left undisturbed, Miss Malone," he warned, his voice low and laden. He took another bite of pie, his gaze never wavering. "I disagree," Ellie asserted, lifting her chin. "I believe everything possesses value, even elements that are flawed or challenging." He chuckled, a hollow, joyless sound. "You're new here," he observed. "You'll learn." He finished the pie, returning the plate with a curt nod. "Good evening, Miss Malone." With that, he pivoted and disappeared, melting into the shadows fringing the gathering. Ellie watched him depart, her mind in turmoil. His words lingered, heavy with unspoken significance. The wary glances intensified as people observed Jack's retreat, then focused on her, their faces a mixture of sympathy and foreboding. Mrs. Henderson hurried to her side, her brow creased with worry. "Ellie, dear, you didn't say anything to irk him, did you?" "Irk him," Ellie echoed, bewildered. "I was simply making conversation." "Well, you know Jack." Mrs. Henderson lowered her voice. He keeps to himself. Best to let him be. He has his reasons. Oh, reasons for what? Ellie pressed, frustration mounting. For being so withdrawn? For acting as if I'm trying to unearth his secrets. Mrs. Henderson patted her arm. He's endured a difficult life, dear. Tragedy, you see. Best not to pry. Some wounds never quite mend. Ellie surveyed the faces watching her. Their expressions a blend of commiseration and silent cautions. A wave of anger washed over her, directed not at Jack, but at the wall of silence that enclosed him, the invisible boundary isolating him from the community. I don't understand, she whispered. Why is everyone so wary of him? Mrs. Henderson sighed. It's not wariness, dear. It's respect, and perhaps a touch of compassion. Just let it go, Ellie. He's not worth the aggravation. But Ellie knew, with a growing conviction, that she couldn't simply disregard it. Something resonated beneath Jack Raynor's rough exterior, something she'd glimpsed in his care for the injured dog, something hinting at profound sorrow. And she was resolute in discovering its source, whatever the price. She mustered a smile, thanked Mrs. Henderson for the pie, and excused herself. The band struck up a lively tune, a melody that seemed to mock her pensive mood. She drifted to the edge of the dance floor, observing the couples as they swayed and spun, their faces bathed in the soft light of the lanterns. Jack had vanished, swallowed by the darkness, leaving Ellie alone with her questions and her burgeoning fascination with Redemption's taciturn cowboy. Whispers from the past, the Redemption Library was a quiet sanctuary, a haven of dusty tomes and hushed whispers. Sunlight filtered through the lace-curtained windows, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the air and casting long shadows across the polished wooden floor. Ellie Malone inhaled deeply, the scent of aged paper and leather strangely comforting. After the unsettling social and Jack Raynor's cryptic warning, she needed answers, and the library seemed the most logical place to start. She approached Martha Bellwether, the librarian, a woman as quiet and unassuming as the library itself. Mrs. Bellwether, I was hoping you could point me towards any resources on Redemption's history. I'm particularly interested in, well, anything really. I want to understand the town better. Martha, perched behind her spectacles, offered a thin smile. Local history is a passion of mine, Miss Malone. We have a small archive in the back, mostly newspaper clippings and town records. I can show you the way. The archive was a cramped room, lined with shelves overflowing with bound volumes and yellowed documents. The air was thick with the scent of decay, a testament to the passage of time. Ellie ran her fingers along the spines, a thrill of anticipation coursing through her. Where to begin? Perhaps the local newspaper archives would be a good start, Martha suggested, her voice barely a whisper. They chronicle the town's events, both big and small. Ellie nodded, pulling down a heavy volume labeled Redemption Register 1,881,890. The pages crackled as she carefully turned them, her eyes scanning the faded print. Births, deaths, town meetings, advertisements for snake oil remedies, and accounts of cattle drives filled the pages. She searched caught, methodically, her focus sharpening with each passing moment. Days turned into weeks in the library with Ellie poring over the town's local historical archives. The archive became her sanctuary, her escape from the curious stares and thinly veiled warnings of the townsfolk. She was determined to unravel the mystery surrounding Jack Raynor, and the past, she was sure, held the key. Then she found it. A small article, tucked away on the bottom of page 5, dated July 12, 1886. The headline read, Raynor Ranch suspected in cattle rustling ring. Ellie's breath caught in her throat. The article, though brief, was damning. It accused the Rayner Ranch, then run by Jack's father, Caleb Rayner, of being involved in a series of cattle rustling incidents that had plagued the area. The evidence was circumstantial, relying heavily on anonymous tips and rumors, but the implication was clear. She read on, her heart pounding in her chest. The article mentioned a heated town meeting where accusations were hurled and tempers flared. Caleb Rayner, it claimed, had vehemently denied the charges. But his protests were met with skepticism and mistrust. Further searching revealed more articles, each painting a darker picture. There were accounts of missing cattle, suspicious tracks leading to and from the Rayner Ranch, and whispers of a hidden branding iron. The narrative was building, weaving a tale of greed, deception, and betrayal. Ellie felt a wave of conflicting emotions: disappointment, confusion, and a flicker of pity. Was this the source of the town's animosity towards Jack? Was he paying for the sins of his father? She continued her search, driven by a need to understand the truth. She found articles detailing the subsequent investigation, which ultimately fizzled out due to lack of concrete evidence. Caleb Rayner was never formally charged, but the shadow of suspicion remained. Then, a final article, dated December 24th, 1886. Caleb Rayner found dead apparent riding accident. The details were sparse. Caleb had been found near the creek, his horse spooked and thrown him. The death was ruled accidental, but Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The timing was too convenient, the circumstances too vague. She closed the volume, her mind reeling. The information was overwhelming, a tangled web of craft, accusations, suspicions, and unanswered questions. She looked up to see Martha Bellwether standing silently nearby, her expression unreadable. "Quite a story, isn't it, Miss Malone?" Martha said softly, her voice laced with a hint of melancholy. Ellie hesitated, unsure of how to respond. "It's complicated," she finally said. Did you know Caleb Rayner?" Martha nodded slowly. "I did. He was a complicated man. Strong, proud, but troubled. Do you think he was guilty?" Ellie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Martha sighed, her gaze drifting towards the window. "That's a question this town has been asking itself for a long time, Miss Malone. Some believed he was innocent, a victim of circumstance. Others were convinced of his guilt, and some chose to believe what was most convenient. And what do you believe, Mrs. Bellwether?" Ellie pressed, her eyes fixed on the librarian's face. Martha hesitated, her lips pursed in thought. "I believe that truth is a fragile thing, Miss Malone. Easily bent, easily broken. And sometimes it's easier to live with a comfortable lie than to face a painful truth." She paused, her gaze meeting Ellie's. "But sometimes the truth has a way of making itself known, no matter how hard we try to bury it." She reached out and gently touched Ellie's arm. "Be careful, Miss Malone. Some secrets are best left undisturbed." Ellie felt a chill run down her spine. Martha's words were a warning, a plea to leave the past in the past. But Ellie couldn't ignore the questions that swirled in her mind. She looked down at the newspaper clippings, the faded print, a silent testament to a story that had shaped the town of Redemption and haunted Jack Rayner for years. She knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she couldn't walk away. She had to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The truth, it seemed, was buried somewhere in the whispers of the past. The sky had been a bruised purple all afternoon, heavy with the threat of rain, but no one in Redemption expected what followed. Started subtly, a low rumble like a distant freight train. Then the rain came, not a gentle shower, but a furious downpour that hammered the tin roofs and turned the dusty streets into muddy rivers. The creek that usually trickled lazily through town began to swell, fed by the relentless onslaught. Ellie was grading papers in her small cottage when the first wave hit. A wall of brown water surged through the street, carrying debris, broken branches, discarded crates, even a runaway chicken in its relentless current. She scrambled to her feet, her heart hammering against her ribs. This wasn't just a rainstorm. This was a flood. Outside, chaos erupted. People shouted, their voices barely audible above the roar of the water. Horses whinnied in panic, their stalls rapidly filling with muddy water. Ellie threw open her door, the force of the wind almost ripping it from her grasp. She saw Mrs. Henderson, the baker, clinging to a lamppost, her face pale with fear. Then she saw Jack. He was on horseback, his dark silhouette a stark contrast against the churning water. He moved with a quiet authority, his voice cutting through the din as he directed people to higher ground. He seemed to know instinctively where the safest paths were, guiding families with small children through the floodwaters, his horse sure-footed and calm. Ellie watched, mesmerized, as he rescued Mrs. Henderson, lifting her effortlessly onto the back of his horse. There was a grim determination in his face, a focused intensity that she hadn't seen before. This wasn't the taciturn crawl rancher she'd come to know. This was a man in command, a man who knew how to survive. "Miss Malone," he shouted, his voice barely audible. "Get to the church. It's the highest point in town." Ellie nodded, her legs suddenly feeling like lead. The water was already knee-deep, and the current was growing stronger. She waded into the flood, fighting against the relentless pull. Debris swirled around her legs, making each step treacherous. She saw a small boy struggling in the water, his face contorted with fear. Without thinking, she lunged forward, grabbing his arm and pulling him towards her. He clung to her, sobbing, his small body trembling. "It's okay," she said, her voice shaking. "I've got you." But the current was too strong. She felt herself losing her footing, the boy slipping from her grasp. Just as she thought they were both going to be swept away, a hand reached out and grabbed her arm. It was Jack. He pulled her and the boy towards him, his grip firm and unwavering. He lifted the boy onto his horse and then, with a strength that surprised her, scooped Ellie up as well. "Hold on tight," he said, his voice low and steady. The ride to the church was a blur of wind and water. Ellie clung to Jack, her face pressed against his back, feeling the solid strength of his body against hers. She could feel the tension in his muscles, the focused energy that radiated from him. The church was already packed with people, huddled together for warmth and safety. The minister, a portly man with a nervous demeanor, was trying to maintain order, but his voice was drowned out by the cries of children and the murmur of worried adults. Jack dismounted, carefully helping Ellie and the boy to the ground. He scanned the crowd, his eyes searching for anyone who needed help. "Are you all right?" he asked Ellie, his voice surprisingly gentle. "I'm fine," she said, her voice still trembling. "Thank you, Jack." He nodded, his gaze lingering on her for a moment before he turned away, disappearing back into the storm. Ellie watched him go, her heart pounding in her chest. She had seen a different side of Jack Rayner today, a side that was strong, capable, and undeniably heroic. The silent cowboy had found his voice, not in words, but in actions. The flood raged throughout the night. The wind howled. and the rain continued to fall in sheets. Inside the church, the atmosphere was tense, a mixture of fear and exhaustion. People huddled together, sharing stories and offering comfort. Ellie found herself drawn to a group of children huddled in a corner. She sat down beside them, pulling out her small book of fairy tales, and began to read. Her voice, though still shaky, filled the room with a sense of calm and reassurance. As she read, she glanced out the window. The storm was still raging, but the first faint light of dawn was beginning to break through the clouds. And in that pale light, she saw Jack, still on horseback, still patrolling the town, ensuring everyone was safe. He was a silent guardian, a watchful protector, a man who had found his redemption not in words, but in deeds. And Ellie knew, with a certainty that warmed her from the inside out, that she was starting to understand the real Jack Rayner, the man beneath the silence. The branding iron, a weary energy permeated the makeshift infirmary. Cots crammed the hall, each burdened with an exhausted soul. The air, thick with the must of wet blankets and anxious perspiration, buzzed with hushed conversations and stifled sobs. Ellie threaded her way through the rows, a damp cloth and basin of cool water her only weapons against despair, tending to those who'd suffered. She spotted Jack toward the rear, propped against a leaning tower of salvaged hymnals, his face a pale mask beneath the grime. A savage gash, raw and uneven, scored his forearm. "Let me clean that," she offered, her tone gentle yet firm. He simply inclined his head in response, his usual stoicism tilting dangerously close to emotional shutdown as he slumped onto an overturned crate. Kneeling before him, Ellie delicately dabbed at the wound. The water blushed crimson almost instantly. A flicker of pain tightened his jaw, his only outward reaction. "You were magnificent out there," Ellie said, breaking the stillness. "I don't know how we could have managed without you." He shrugged, his gaze locked on the floorboards. Someone had to step up. Ellie wrung out the cloth, her frustration rising. "It was more than that, Jack. The way you took charge, directed everyone, you averted tragedy." Finally he met her gaze. His eyes, normally shielded and cautious, now revealed a fleeting glimpse of vulnerability. "Doesn't change a thing." "It alters everything," Ellie countered, her voice gaining heat. She couldn't fathom his ingrained self-denial, his relentless need to diminish himself. "Can't you see?" He averted his eyes again, the momentary openness vanishing behind his well-worn wall of indifference. Ellie sighed, continuing her task. As she worked upward, cleansing the grime clinging to his shredded shirt near his shoulder, the fabric shifted, exposing a patch of skin. It was then she saw it. A brand. A stark, stylized R encased in a circle. The lines were dark against the pale skin, the edges softened by time, yet the design was unmistakable. A jolt went through her. The grainy image from a newspaper clipping burned in her memory, the photograph of stolen cattle, each bearing the same distinctive mark. The accusation that had dogged Jack's father, cattle rustling. Her pulse hammered against her ribs, constricting her breath. She forced herself to remain calm. She needed verification. She required unadulterated proof. "Jack," she murmured, barely a breath. "Just hold still." Reaching for a nearby lantern, she adjusted it, angling the warm light to better illuminate his shoulder. The brand glowed, its details seared into her mind. The R was slightly askew, the circle imperfect, as if branded by an unsteady hand. Still, it was undeniably the same. Her gaze climbed back to his face. He hadn't stirred, hadn't uttered a sound. His eyes were riveted on hers, a silent question lurking within. He knew she'd seen. Slowly, Ellie lowered the lantern, her hand trembling ever so slightly. The silence thickened between them, heavy with unspoken accusations and unanswered pleas. Where did you get that?" she managed, her voice a mere thread. Jack's jaw clenched. He looked down once more, evading her scrutiny. "It's an old brand." "I know what it is, Jack," Ellie stated, her voice gaining. "Resolve. I've seen it before, in a news clipping, about your father." He finally raised his head, his expression an inscrutable mask. "You've been snooping, haven't you?" "I wanted to understand," Ellie pleaded. "I wanted to grasp why everyone here treats you like an outcast." "And now you do?" he challenged, his voice sharp with resentment. Ellie remained mute, unable to articulate her swirling thoughts. The brand was a tangible symbol of the gossip, the whispers, the condemnation that had plagued him his entire existence. It was a brand of disgrace, of inherited guilt. She reached out, her fingers tracing the scarred outline of the R. The skin beneath was warm, faintly rough. She could feel the subtle ridges of the healed wound. "Did your father—" she began, then trailed off, unable to voice the damning question. Jack recoiled, his features hardening. "It doesn't matter. It's done. It's in the past." "But it does matter, Jack," Ellie insisted, her voice rising. "It matters to me. I need to know the truth." He shot to his feet, towering over her. "The truth is, some things are best left in the ground." He turned and vanished into the throng of displaced people. Ellie watched him recede, her heart aching with a tangle of confusion, disappointment, and a growing sense of foreboding. She stared at the basin, the water now stained a murky rose. The brand blazed in her mind's eye. The tilted R, the flawed circle, the weight of history imprinted in a single, indelible scar. She now understood that the truth surrounding Jack Rayner was far more intricate, far more devastating than she had ever conceived. And she knew, with a conviction that settled deep within her soul, that she wouldn't rest until she unearthed it, no matter the repercussions. The flood had receded, but a different kind of storm was gathering, a vortex of secrets and lies, of historical transgressions and contemporary perils. And Ellie Malone had just stumbled headlong into its vortex. The first words the antiseptic scent, a stark mask for the reek of sweat and dread, still dominated the makeshift infirmary. Ellie stood vigil near Jack's bedroll, the coarse wool blanket pulled snugly around him. Awake, he fixed his gaze on the roughly timbered ceiling, jaw clenched tight. Lamplight, unsteady and low, painted his face with shifting shadows, emphasizing the keen angles and the stubborn set to his mouth. She'd waited until the medic deemed him stable, strong enough to withstand visitors, strong enough, perhaps, for a confrontation he'd clearly prefer to avoid. She cleared her throat. "Jack?" His eyes flickered to her, cautious and guarded. "Ellie, you shouldn't be here. You should be resting." "I'm all right," she countered, waving away his worry. She dragged over a wobbly stool and settled onto it, her gaze unwavering. "I saw the brand, Jack." His brow knit together. "Saw what?" Directness felt necessary. "On your shoulder, the mark." The air in the small space seemed to thicken. Silence pulled taut like a bowstring. He averted his gaze, a telltale tick in his cheek. "It signifies nothing," he finally rasped. "It signifies something," she gently insisted, her tone firm. "It's the Rayner family's brand, isn't it? Like the one in that old newspaper clipping?" A flinch, almost imperceptible, betrayed him. The article. Unearthed from the town archives, A brittle, yellowed page detailing the accusations against his father whispers of stolen cattle, casting a long shadow over the Rayner name. "Get out, Ellie," he ordered, a sharp edge in his voice. "This doesn't concern you." "It does concern me," she insisted. "When the whole town judges you based on what your father may or may not have done. When that prejudice nearly cost you your life today." His eyes snapped back, flaring with a controlled fury that stole her breath. "It wasn't them. It was a stampede." "And what triggered the stampede, Jack?" "Fear, fueled by years of prejudice, whispers about the rustler's son." He pushed himself up straighter, ignoring the sharp intake of breath that revealed his pain. "My father wasn't a rustler." The words came out clipped, precise, like bullets. "But the article lies," he bellowed, the force of it shocking them both. He broke into a fit of coughing, clutching at his side, his features twisting with a mixture of pain and rage. "Fabrications, spread by jealous rivals who couldn't compete with his success." Ellie reached out tentatively, her hand hovering near his arm, afraid of provoking him further. "Jack, I just want to understand." He recoiled, his gaze intense. "There's nothing to understand. My father was a good man, an honest man. Everything he had, he earned, and they stole it all from him." The unvarnished emotion in his voice, the barely leashed fury, was a world away from the taciturn, composed cowboy she knew. This was a man wounded, defending his father's legacy, carrying a burden that had weighed him down for years. "Then tell me the truth," she pleaded, her voice soft. "Tell me what really happened." He scrutinized her, his eyes searching hers, trying to assess her sincerity, her trustworthiness. For a heartbeat, she thought he would yield, finally confide in her. But then, his jaw tightened once more, the familiar impassive mask settling back into place. "It's irrelevant," he said, his voice flat and drained. "It's in the past. Let it lie." "But it's not in the past, Jack. It's here, now, shaping your life, coloring how people perceive you." "Their opinions are meaningless," he stated, but she caught the glint of hurt in his eyes, the almost imperceptible tremor in his hand. "They shouldn't be meaningless," she said quietly. "You deserve better, Jack. You deserve to be seen for who you are, not who they think you are." He shook his head, his gaze fixed on the floor. "You don't understand. It's too late. The damage is irreparable." "It's never too late," she argued, her voice ringing with conviction. "There's always hope for redemption, for forgiveness." He looked up then, his eyes filled with a blend of disbelief and something akin to hope. But it was quickly snuffed out, replaced by a steely resolve. "Drop it, Ellie," he said, his voice low and final. "Don't go digging around. You won't like what you find." "But I have to know," she insisted. "No, you don't," he snapped, his voice rising again. "You don't need to know anything. Go back to your classroom, teach your children, and leave me alone. Leave my family alone." He turned away, his back stiff, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. Ellie knew she'd pushed too hard, overstepped a boundary he wasn't prepared to concede. She rose, her heart heavy with disappointment. She yearned to help him, to soothe his pain, to clear his family's name. But he was pushing her away, constructing defenses, walls that seemed insurmountable. "All right, Jack," she said softly. "I'll leave you alone, for now." She turned and walked away, leaving him isolated in the dimly lit infirmary, alone with his demons, alone with his torment. But as she walked, she couldn't shake the impression that she was abandoning him to a fight he couldn't possibly win on his own. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep within her, that she wouldn't, stay away for long. Unraveling the past, the Harmony Creek Library smelled of aged paper and the sweet polish of beeswax, a quiet haven punctuated only by the grandfather clock's measured cadence. Ellie Malone confronted Martha Bellwether, the librarian whose thick lenses magnified eyes that seemed to absorb the very essence of Harmony Creek's past. "Martha, I need information on the Rayner family," Ellie stated, her tone a low, firm declaration. Specifically, the cattle-rustling accusations from 15 years prior. Martha's gaze intensified, her amplified stare scrutinizing Ellie with unsettling sharpness. "That's a closed chapter best left undisturbed, child. Some histories are best left unexamined." She reached for a cleaning cloth, fastidiously buffing a pristine shelf. "But, Jack," Ellie paused, carefully selecting her words. "He's burdened by his father's legacy. I can't believe he warrants this. Was there ever genuine evidence?" Martha exhaled, the sound a deflating sigh, hinting at weary resignation. "Evidence can be a fickle thing around here, influenced by who wields the power. Jedediah Rayner wasn't a beloved figure. He cultivated animosity, powerful animosity. Enemies who might have orchestrated a set. Up?" Ellie countered, her focus unwavering. The librarian's gaze drifted toward the sun-drenched street, visible through the window. Suffice to say, Jedediah wasn't known for his amiability. He was a relentless man, forceful. People held him in fear just as much as they respected him or professed to. But fabrication? That's a weighty allegation, Ellie. Some around here possess long memories. Memories shaped by prevailing narratives, Ellie retorted, a rise in her voice. "I need the truth, Martha, not conjecture and hearsay." Martha finally met Ellie's searching gaze, a fleeting, enigmatic expression dancing within her eyes. "Delve into property records, deeds, liens. Follow the financial trail, child. It reveals hidden stories, and proceed with caution. Some still believe in a rough and ready justice." Ellie thanked her, departing the library, the librarian's cryptic words lingering in her thoughts. The afternoon sun blazed upon Main Street as she headed toward the Golden Gulch Saloon, a hub for Harmony Creek's gossip and, she suspected, some deeply concealed truths. The saloon interior was dim, the air saturated with the combined scents of flat beer and cured tobacco. A smattering of patrons occupied the space, their faces weathered maps of hardship. Ellie approached the bar, the symphony of glass on wood briefly pausing as all eyes locked onto her. "Greetings, gentlemen," she announced, her tone composed despite the visible tension hanging in the air. "I'm seeking information concerning the Rayner family, specifically Jedediah Rayner and the cattle-rustling allegations." A hushed murmur circulated. The bartender, a stout man sporting a magnificent handlebar mustache, slowly polished the countertop with deliberate movements. "That's ancient history, Miss Malone, best forgotten." "Ancient history that continues to haunt Jack Rayner," Ellie responded. "I'm attempting to grasp what transpired. Were any of you present during the time?" A man with a salt-tanned pepper beard and narrowed eyes stepped forward. "I was. Jedediah Rayner was a marauder. He robbed honest folk. He reaped what he sowed." "What exactly did he plunder?" Ellie pressed, her eyes holding his. "Can you offer specifics? Brands, markings, anything conclusive?" The man hesitated, his gaze flitting nervously. "Everyone knew what he was doing. No need for details. He was guilty as sin." "Everyone knew, or everyone claimed?" Ellie pressed, detecting a carefully curated tale. "Did anyone actually witness him stealing livestock?" Another man, seated at a shadowed table, slammed his glass onto the surface. "Are you accusing us of being untruthful, Miss Malone?" His voice was a dangerous rumble. Ellie met his stare directly. "I'm after veracity. Thus far, I've encountered generalized accusations and transparent intimidation tactics." The man stood, looming above Ellie. "The truth is, Jedediah Rayner was a venomous viper, and vipers tend to beget vipers." The bartender intervened, his face set in hard lines. "That's enough, Earl. Miss Malone, perhaps it's time you departed." Ellie stood her ground, her heart hammering, her resolve untouched. "I hold no fear of you," she declared, her voice cutting through the haze. "I hold no fear of any of you. I intend to uncover the truth of what happened, and if Jedediah Rayner was the victim of a setup, I'm going to clear his name." Turning on her heel, she exited the saloon, the oppressive silence following her. Emerging back into the sunlight, she noticed a figure propped against a post across the way. An unfamiliar face, shadowed by the brim of a hat. As she caught his eye, he straightened, his gaze icy. He touched the brim of his hat in a mocking gesture and then vanished down a narrow alleyway. A chill ran down Ellie's spine, even under the warm sun. She was clearly venturing into treacherous territory, but retreat was not an option. Jack Rayner deserved closure, and she would persist until she discovered it, regardless of the personal cost. The land records. She recalled Martha's advice. That would be her next stop. She needed to unearth something definitive about Jedediah Rayner, either condemning him or absolving him, and she would dig until she did. That night, sleep played hide and seek. Each groan of the old boarding house resembled a footfall. Every shadow looked like a hiding danger. She stared at the ceiling, the collective secrets of Harmony Creek pressing down on her. Was an outsider, a recent arrival, challenging a narrative that had been preserved and fiercely defended for 15 years. But she was also a teacher, a woman committed to the principles of justice and the power of uncovering truths. And she would not be silenced. The shadow of Harding the county records office smelled of aged paper and time, a scent that stirred Ellie's curiosity more than any pulp adventure. Sunlight, filtered through grime-streaked panes, cast beams onto the swirling dust motes as she delicately handled the antique land deeds and livestock brass. Ledgers. Martha, the librarian, hadn't exaggerated. These archives guarded secrets redemption was eager to suppress. The afternoon dissolved into a focused quest as Ellie meticulously compared names, dates, and brands, her fingertips gliding over the faded script on Kai. Brittle parchment, her goal. To link Silas Harding to the Rayner spread, or to Jedediah Rayner's pre-wrestling financial woes. Whispers painted Jedediah's monetary problems as self-inflicted, fueled by drink and cards, but Ellie Cra suspected a deeper game. Then, a crack in the facade. A livestock manifest, penned weeks before the rustling, detailed a significant cattle sale by Jedediah Rayner to a buyer listed only as S.H. No accompanying surname or address, just those initials. Ellie's pulse quickened. Additional transactions under S.H. invariably led to a proxy buyer in Harding's employ. Another document, a carefully worded contract, exposed a substantial loan offered to Jedediah by Harding, laden with predatory terms, mere months preceding the rustling. The Rayner ranch itself served as collateral. Default meant Harding's acquisition. A cold dread settled in Ellie's stomach. The picture forming was disturbingly clear. Silas Harding orchestrated Jedediah's ruin. He likely masterminded the rustling, pinning the blame on Jedediah, then positioned himself to seize the ranch upon inevitable default. The puzzle pieces clicked, together, revealing a portrait of avarice and calculated heartlessness. Silas Harding wasn't merely a prosperous landowner. He was a wolf in sheep's clothing, systematically dismantling his competition. And Jack, haunted by his father's alleged crimes, had been living under the long shadow of Harding's deception. Gathering the documents, her hands betrayed a slight tremor. This needed exposure, but who would believe her? The town's prosperity was interwoven with Harding's influence. Accusation felt akin to undermining redemption itself. Stepping from the records office, the setting sun painted long, menacing shadows across the dusty street. The air, thick with unspoken menace, made her skin crawl. A quick glance confirmed it. She was being watched. She quickened her pace down the boardwalk, her boots drumming on the aged wood. Safety lay in her little cottage, a place to regroup and plan. But rounding a corner, she froze. Silas Harding, a looming figure, leaned against the general store, his face masked by the shadow of his hat. No greeting, no smile, only a flinty gaze. Ellie halted, her breath trapped in her chest. She'd underestimated Harding. She'd seen a shrewd businessman, perhaps ruthless, but not the extent of his control, the depths of his malevolence. He knew about her inquiry. He knew she was unearthing the truth. Miss Malone. Harding purred, his voice smooth as silk yet edged with steel. Enjoying our humble town? Steel met her spine. Redemption certainly has its charms, Mr. Harding. Indeed. And I trust you're finding its history just as compelling. He advanced a step, his shadow engulfing her. History always holds a certain fascination, Ellie countered, her tone firm despite the tremor in her hands, especially when it brings hidden truths to light. A low, mirthless chuckle escaped Harding's lips. Truth is an elusive thing, Miss Malone. Often, it's best left buried. I must disagree, Ellie asserted, raising her chin defiantly. Truth has a right to shine. His eyes narrowed, becoming cold and dangerous. You're a tenacious woman, Miss Malone. I grant you that. But tenacity can be perilous. Some matters are best left undisturbed, for the welfare of all. Is that a threat, Mr. Harding? Merely a caution, Miss Malone. Consider it well-intentioned advice. Certain stones are better left in place, for your own benefit. He straightened, his gaze holding hers. Good evening, Miss Malone. With the tip of his hat, he turned and melted into the encroaching darkness. Paralyzed, Ellie felt her heart hammering against her ribs. Harding's veiled threat couldn't be clearer. Retreat, or suffer the consequences. She had stumbled upon a web far more intricate, far more perilous than she could have conceived. This was no longer just about righting a past wrong. She was facing a powerful and unprincipled man who wouldn't hesitate to safeguard his secrets. She dashed back to her cottage, bolting the door behind her. The cozy space felt suddenly fragile, vulnerable. Peering through the window, she scanned the inky blackness. The shadows seemed to watch, to wait. Retreat was impossible, not now, when she was so close. But caution was paramount. Silas Harding was a dangerous adversary, and she was involved in a risky game. She stared at the documents spread across her makeshift desk, the damning evidence of Harding's treachery. She thought of Jack, burdened by his father's disgrace, oblivious to the conspiracy that had shattered his family. Harding couldn't be allowed to prevail. She had to find a way to expose him, to exonerate Jedediah, and to offer Jack the absolution he deserved. But doing so meant placing herself in mortal danger. Alone, in a town under the thumb of a ruthless and influential man. She could trust no one but herself. As the wind howled a mournful tune outside, rattling the window panes of her humble abode, Ellie Malone knew one thing with unwavering certainty. The battle for redemption had just begun, and she was standing squarely in the crosshairs. A cowboy's protection, the sinking sun painted Redemption's main street in hues of amber and ochre as Ellie emerged from the mercantile, a laden grocery bag digging into her arm. She paused, tilting her face to the lingering warmth, a quiet satisfaction curving her lips. The county archives had yielded the prize irrefutable evidence linking Silas Harding to Jedediah Rayner's ruin. The challenge now lay in wielding this knowledge without endangering herself or Jack. "Miss Malone," a voice drawled, shattering her reverie. Harding, his presence a deliberate barricade, stood before her. The affable glint habitually present in his eyes had been replaced by a steely chill. "We need a word." Ellie's smile evaporated. She tightened her grip on the bed, her pulse quickening. "I doubt that's necessary, Mr. Harding." He advanced, encroaching on her space. The air seemed to vibrate with unspoken menace. "Let's just say I've caught wind of your little inquiry. Rummaging in the past, are we?" Ellie stood firm, refusing to yield ground. "I'm merely researching Redemption's history. Some histories are best left undisturbed, Miss Malone. For everyone concerned," Harding cautioned, his voice a gravelly undertone. "Certain lineages, such as the Rayners, court misfortune. You wouldn't want to be caught in the fallout, would you?" A surge of indignation coursed through Ellie. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Harding?" Harding emitted a dry, mirthless chuckle. "Simply offering a friendly word of advice. Some residents might frown upon your investigations. This town holds a grudge against outsiders who rattle skeletons." He leaned closer, the odor of stale tobacco clinging to his breath. "Consider this your only warning." Ellie's breath caught, her gaze unwavering as she refused to betray fear. She acknowledged the danger, but defiance hardened her resolve. "I appreciate the concern, Mr. Harding," she stated, her voice betraying only a slight tremor. "However, I believe in unearthing the truth, regardless of whose comfort it disturbs." Abruptly, a figure materialized behind Harding, deepening the shadows. Ellie's eyes widened as Jack Rayner strode into the space between them. His expression was an unreadable mask, the soft, contemplative blue of his eyes now burning with Arctic intensity. Startled, Harding pivoted. "Rayner, what business is this of yours?" Jack offered no immediate reply. His silence, heavy and charged, spoke volumes. The only sound was the soft sigh of leather as he adjusted his stance. Every inch the stoic gunslinger stepping from the pages of a dime novel. "Mr. Harding," Jack finally stated, his voice a deep resonance that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. "I believe you were just departing." Harding scoffed, but a flicker of apprehension betrayed his bravado. He knew pushing Jack Rayner was a fool's errand. "Just a neighborly conversation with the schoolteacher," he offered, attempting a tone of casual indifference. Jack's gaze intensified. "I don't recall extending an invitation for you to converse with Miss Malone." The air crackled with barely suppressed hostility. Ellie felt the raw power radiating from Jack. A protective instinct previously unseen. It was a facet of him she hadn't glimpsed, a stark contrast to the reserved, introspective man she knew. Sensing the shift in the dynamic, Harding opted for retreat, but not without a parting barb. "Just a word to the wise, Rayner. Some things are better left buried." He shot a pointed glare at Ellie, then spun on his heel and vanished down the dusty street. Jack remained, a solid bulwark between Ellie and Harding's departure route. He hesitated to face her, as if reluctant to reveal what smoldered within his eyes. The quiet stretched, broken only by distant horses and the whisper of wind through cottonwoods lining the creek. At long last he turned, his gaze searching her features. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice softer now, the anger receding slightly. Ellie nodded, her throat constricted. "Yes, I'm fine. Thank you, Jack." He continued to scrutinize her, his brow creased with worry. "Didn't touch you, did he?" "No. He just had advised me," Ellie said, her voice barely audible. "He's aware I've been delving into your father's case." Jack's jaw clenched. "I asked you to drop it, Ellie. "I know, but it—" She trailed off, unsure how to articulate her motivations without divulging the extent of her discoveries. "I couldn't. It's unjust, what happened to your father." He sighed, raking a hand through his dark hair. "It's finished, Ellie. It happened a lifetime ago. Nothing can be done." "But there is," she countered, her voice gaining conviction. "I've uncovered evidence, Jack. Proof that Silas Harding orchestrated your father's downfall." His eyes widened, surprise warring with suspicion. "What sort of evidence?" Ellie demurred, reluctant to expose too much. "I can't divulge specifics just yet. It's too risky. But I give you my word, I'll do everything within my power to exonerate your father's name." Jack regarded her, his expression a complex tapestry of disbelief and a hesitant stirring of hope. "Why are you doing this, Ellie?" She met his gaze, her heart drumming a frantic rhythm. "Because it's the ethical thing to do, Jack. And because I believe in you." A flicker of raw emotion washed over his face, a vulnerability that stole her breath. He averted his gaze, severing the intense connection. "You shouldn't," he said, his voice strained and low. "Believing in me is a mistake." "I disagree," Ellie said softly, edging closer. "I think you're a good man, Jack Rayner. A far better man than you allow yourself to believe." He shook his head, his gaze fixed on the parched earth. "You don't know me, Ellie. You have no idea what I'm capable of." "Perhaps not," she conceded, "but I'm willing to learn." He met her gaze once more, his eyes a turbulent sea of pain and longing. "Be careful, Ellie," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Harding is a ruthless man. He won't hesitate to harm you if he perceives you as a hindrance." "I know," she said, meeting his gaze with unwavering resolve. "But I'm not afraid, not while you're on my side." He looked away again, a battle raging within him. "I can offer no guarantees, Ellie," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "But I'll do everything I can to safeguard you." And in that instant, Ellie understood that her struggle wasn't solely about Jack's vindication, but for his very soul, and maybe, just maybe, for her own. The stakes had never been higher, yet she stood ready to confront whatever trials lay ahead, so long as she could face them at his side. Breaking the silence, the air inside the cabin pressed down with a new weight, a far cry from the peaceful solitude Jack craved. It throbbed with unspoken accusations, a residue of years gone by. Across the rough-hewn table, Ellie's gaze held a potent blend of concern and resolve. The lamplight caught in her eyes, mirroring an inner fierce spirit he simultaneously cherished and dreaded. He shied from that intensity, tracing the table's time-worn grooves. "You shouldn't have sought out Harding," he rasped, his voice rusty from disuse. "The man is venomous, Ellie." "I had to," she countered, her tone gentle but firm. "I needed to see for myself, and, Jack," her fingers danced tentatively across the wood, brushing his skin, "I discovered something, proof that your father wasn't alone in this." He recoiled as if stung, snatching his hand back. The mere mention of his father felt like a gut punch. "It's over," he mumbled, turning away. "Ancient history, best left undisturbed." "No, it isn't," Ellie insisted, her voice gaining an edge. "It matters to me, to the truth, and especially to you, Jack. Can't you see? This injustice has haunted you for too damn long." He shot to his feet, pacing the cramped space like a cornered wolf. The phantoms of his past swirled around him, hissing accusations, feeding the familiar ache in his chest. He raked a hand through his hair, a telling sign of his craw. Inner storm. "You don't get it," he breathed, barely audible. "You simply can't." Ellie mirrored his movement, her eyes locked on him, awash in a compassion that both soothed and unnerved him. "Then help me understand, Jack. Unburden yourself." He hesitated, the words a stubborn lump in his throat. A levee about to break after years of forced restraint. "It happened ages ago," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "My father, Jedediah, was a good man, industrious, honorable. He built this ranch from the dirt up, with his bare hands." A pause, the memory of his father's calloused hands, his warm smile piercing his heart. Then came the drought, devastated everyone, some worse than others. The bank started calling in loans, foreclosing on ranches. Harding was behind it all, gobbling up the land for next to nothing. "Your father wouldn't buckle," Ellie prompted softly, piecing together the narrative. "No," Jack affirmed, his jaw clenched. "He refused, said he'd sooner starve than let Harding triumph. Then cattle started vanishing, mine, and others who stood their ground. Rustling, Harding pinned it on my father, fueled the whispers, poisoned the town against him." He halted his restless pacing, his gaze lost somewhere beyond the cabin's confines, swallowed by the past. "They found a few of the stolen cattle on our property. Circumstantial evidence, but enough to convict him in their eyes. My father swore his innocence, claimed he was framed, but no one believed him. Except me. Except me." Voice cracked. "They arrested him, paraded him in front of the whole town. It was a spectacle, people jeering, spitting, branding him a thief. I tried to defend him, to reason with them, but they wouldn't hear it." He closed his eyes, the image of his father's face, etched with despair and humiliation, seared into his memory. "He never faced a judge. He perished in jail. They ruled it a heart attack. But I know it was the shame, the injustice. It killed him as surely as a bullet." The silence descended once more, thick and oppressive. Ellie closed the distance between them, her hand seeking and finding purchase on his arm. He didn't flinch away. "And afterwards?" she asked quietly. He swallowed hard, fighting the constriction in his throat. "Afterwards I was alone. The town ostracized me, marked me as the offspring of a thief, a liar. I tried to salvage his reputation, but no one would listen. Harding saw to that." He met Ellie's gaze, his eyes mirroring a pain that seemed to burrow into her soul. "So I made a choice. I swore to remain silent, to lie low, to shun any conflict, to safeguard whatever remained of my family's name. I believed that if I simply kept quiet, perhaps they'd forget. Perhaps they'd leave me be. But they didn't," Ellie said, her voice imbued with understanding. "No," he admitted, "they didn't." The taunts never ceased. The glares, the condemnation, it never truly went away. He finally held her gaze, his eyes pleading for her to comprehend. "Which is why I don't want you entangled in this, Ellie. It's perilous. Harding wields influence. He'll stop at nothing to guard his secrets. I won't let you get hurt. Ellie squeezed his arm, her touch solid and comforting. I'm not daunted, Jack, and I'm staying put. Your father deserves to have his honor restored, and you deserve to shed this burden. Her eyes shone with purpose. You vowed to be silent, Jack. But silence has never righted a wrong. It only lets the darkness flourish. It's time to break free from that vow. It's time to find your voice. He looked at her unwavering faith in him, in his father. In her eyes, he glimpsed a reflection of the man he once was, the man he could become again. Hope, a sensation he thought long extinguished, sparked anew within him. I don't know how, he confessed, his voice raw with vulnerability. I don't know where to begin. Ellie offered a gentle, encouraging smile. We'll navigate it together, Jack, one step at a time. But the inaugural step is to speak, to voice the truth, to allow your voice to resonate. He gazed at her, at this woman who had somehow breached the walls he had so meticulously erected around himself. He saw not only compassion, but fortitude, courage, and an unyielding dedication to justice. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, he sensed a flicker of promise. Okay, he whispered, barely audible. Okay, Ellie, I'll talk. The price of truth, the wind, a frigid lash, bullied Jack and Ellie down the choked path to the derelict mill. Jagged shards of metal and rotted timbers stabbed at the overcast sky, the gaunt remains of a once booming enterprise, another casualty claimed by Harding's avarice. Are you certain about this, Elle? Jack rasped, his voice raw from years of silence. This place is liable to collapse. Ellie, resolute, cinched her shawl tighter. Harding laundered his schemes through this mill, didn't he? The records, the books, something incriminating must remain. A direct line to Jedediah's undoing. Her gaze, sharp with purpose, swept the crumbling edifice. Jack sighed, his breath pluming in the frozen air. He conceded her point, but the prospect of exhuming the past, of confronting the stark artifacts of his father's ruin, pressed heavily on him. He quelled the feeling, prioritizing Ellie's well-being. Stay close, he cautioned, his hand instinctively brushing the pistol nestled in his waistband. Inside, the mill yawned, a shadowy warren of rot and ruin. Sunbeams, fractured by holes in the decaying roof, illuminated dancing dust motes. The air, thick and stagnant, reeked of mold and spent industry, a spectral echo of vanished vitality. Ellie choked back a cough, pulling her scarf higher. The air, it's rank. It's the stench of Harding's deceit, Jack retorted, nudging aside a heap of debris with his boot. He began a systematic search, his eyes probing every corner and crevice. Ellie mirrored his actions, her movements swift and focused. Hours trickled by, punctuated only by the aged structure's groans and the skittering of unseen rodents. Their finds amounted to little, broken machinery and worthless scraps. Frustration began to gnaw, a chilling tendril constricting Ellie's initial optimism. Perhaps we were mistaken, she murmured, her voice barely audible. We aren't, Jack countered, his jaw set. Harding is too meticulous to leave blatant clues. We simply need to delve deeper. He made for a collapsing office in the mill's corner, its door dangling from a single hinge. As his hand neared the warped wood, a voice reverberated from the entrance. Well, now, what have we here? Silas Harding stood framed against the dwindling light, his expression a cruel mockery of amusement. Two goons bookended him, their hands possessively gripping their gun belts. Jack shifted, positioning himself between Ellie and Harding's menacing stare. "What do you want, Harding?" "Just a cordial visit," Harding purred, his voice saturated with malice. "Heard you two was snooping where you shouldn't. Thought I'd offer a bit of encouragement." He advanced a step, his eyes flinty. "This town remembers, Raynor. Don't force me to dredge up what befell your father." Ellie stepped past Jack, defying him. "Your threats are hollow, Harding. I know what you did to Jedediah, and I intend to prove it." Harding emitted a dry, rasping laugh. "Brave sentiments, schoolmarm, but sentiments are mere winds. And in this town, my word is gospel." He indicated his men with a subtle gesture. "Remind them of that." The men advanced, their eyes locked onto Jack. He braced himself, ready for a fight, but Ellie seized his arm. "Don't," she implored. "It's precisely what he desires." Harding's smile widened, a predatory glint in his eyes. "A perceptive girl. Perhaps you're not so naive after all." He refocused on Ellie. "I'll offer you one chance, Miss Malone. Abandon this town and bury your obsession with Jedediah Raynor. Otherwise, let's just say that accidents occur." Ellie stood firm, her chin tilted defiantly. "I'm not capitulating, Harding. I intend to remain and expose you for the fraud and the villain you are." Harding's face darkened with venom. "You've courted this," he hissed. He nodded to his henchmen, who surged forward, pistols drawn. Just as they moved to strike, a resounding crash echoed from within the office. Everyone froze, their attention snapping to the sound. Jack seized the opening, pushing Ellie behind him and tackling one of Harding's brutes. The second hesitated, unsure of how to react. Ellie, quick-witted, bolted into the office. She scrambled through the detritus, her eyes darting for the source of the disruption. She discovered it behind a dislodged panel in the wall, a small wooden strongbox, its lid slightly open. She seized the box and wrenched it open. Within, resting on a bed of faded velvet, were several meticulously kept ledgers. She flipped through them, her pulse hammering in her ears. The entries were veiled in cryptic jargon and initials, but one name leaped out, Jedediah Raynor. And adjacent to it, in a different hand, a sequence of figures that unmistakably signified a debt impossibly beyond Jedediah's means. This was it, consummation of Harding's crooked machinations. As she hugged the ledgers to her chest, she heard a shout from outside. Harding's thugs were gaining ground. She needed to escape. She erupted from the office, brandishing the ledgers. "I have them," she cried. "I have the evidence." Harding's eyes widened in stunned disbelief. He lunged toward her, his hand outstretched like a claw. Jack, spotting the danger, hurled himself in front of Ellie, absorbing the brunt of Harding's attack. They wrestled on the floor, a chaotic maelstrom of blows and fury. Ellie, her heart pounding, sprinted for the exit, cradling the ledgers. As she gained the doorway, she glanced back. Jack was holding his own against Harding, but he was outnumbered, outmatched. She couldn't abandon him. She halted, her breath ragged and shallow. She regarded the ledgers in her grasp, then back at Jack, battling for his survival. The cost of truth, she realized, might be steeper than she had ever anticipated. She faced a terrible choice. Redemption's voice, the gunshot, echoed in Ellie's ears, a ringing reminder of the mill, of Harding's cold eyes, of the choice she had made. She'd shoved Jack aside, taking the brunt of Harding's rage, giving him the chance to escape with the ledgers. Now, nursing a bruised shoulder and a burning fury, she watched Jack pace the confines of his cabin. "He'll come after you, Ellie," Jack rasped, his voice a low growl roughened by disuse and worry. The firelight danced in his usually stoic eyes, reflecting a raw fear she hadn't seen before. "You shouldn't have done that." "Someone had to get those ledgers out of there," Ellie countered, her voice sharper than intended. She rubbed her shoulder, the pain a dull ache that was easily overshadowed by her determination. "We have him, Jack. Those ledgers are proof. We can take him down." "And what if he takes you down first?" He stopped pacing, his gaze intense. "He's a cornered animal, Ellie. He'll be even more dangerous now." Ellie met his gaze, her own unwavering. "Then we corner him right back. We don't give him a chance to hurt anyone else, not anymore." She knew she was pushing him, forcing him to confront the demons he'd kept locked away for so long. But she also knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within her, that Jack was the only one who could truly bring Harding to justice. The town council meeting was scheduled for the following evening. Ellie spent the day poring over the ledgers, meticulously organizing the evidence of Harding's fraudulent land deals and embezzled funds. The numbers painted a clear picture of a man driven by greed, a man who had systematically ruined families, including Jack's. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across redemption, Ellie felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. This was it. Everything hinged on tonight. The town hall was packed, the air thick with anticipation and suspicion. Every eye in the room seemed to bore into Ellie as she walked to the front, the ledgers clutched tightly in her hands. Silas Harding sat at the head of the council table, his face a mask of righteous indignation. He looked every bit the respected businessman, the pillar of the community. But Ellie knew the truth. "Mr. Harding," Ellie began, her voice clear and strong despite the tremor in her hands. "I have here evidence of your criminal activities, evidence that proves you systematically defrauded the people of Redemption for your own personal gain." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Harding scoffed, leaning back in his chair with an air of bored amusement. "These are outrageous accusations, Miss Malone. I demand you retract them immediately." Ellie ignored him, opening the ledgers and presenting them to the council members. "These ledgers detail fraudulent land deals, falsified documents, and the embezzlement of town funds. They show how Mr. Harding manipulated the system to enrich himself at the expense of honest, hard-working people." She pointed to specific entries, explaining the complex web of deceit with clarity and precision. Some council members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their faces etched with doubt and uncertainty. Others remained loyal to Harding, their expressions hardening with disapproval. "This is all circumstantial," Harding interjected, his voice rising. "These ledgers could have been fabricated. Miss Malone has a personal vendetta against me, fueled by her misguided sympathy for that Rayner boy." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Jack, who stood at the back of the hall, his presence a palpable force. He had initially refused to come, but Ellie had pleaded with him, arguing that his presence was crucial, that his voice was the only one that could truly break Harding's hold on the town. Now, he stood tall and unwavering, his gaze fixed on Harding. "It's not circumstantial," Jack said, his voice echoing through the hall, a voice that hadn't been heard in public for years. Every head turned, surprised to hear Jack speak so clearly in a crowded space. "It's the truth." A collective gasp swept through the room. Jack stepped forward, his boots thudding on the wooden floor. He walked slowly, deliberately, until he stood just a few feet from Harding. "My father wasn't a drunk or a gambler," Jack said, his voice gaining strength, the pent-up anger of years finally finding release. "He was a good man, a hard-working man. You ruined him, Harding. You cheated him out of his land, drove him to despair, and then spread lies about him to cover your own tracks." Harding's face flushed crimson. "Raynor, you're delusional. Your father was a disgrace." "He was a victim," Jack retorted, his eyes blazing. "A victim of your greed, your lies, your corruption." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, worn piece of paper. "This is a copy of the original deed to our ranch, the one you forged to steal it from my father." He handed the deed to a council member, who examined it closely. The room was silent, the tension so thick it could be cut with a knife. Just when it seemed Harding might regain control, a voice rang out from the back of the hall. "He's telling the truth." Everyone turned to see Mrs. Abernathy, the town's oldest resident, standing tall and defiant. "I was there," she declared, her voice surprisingly strong. "I saw Silas Harding pressure Jedediah Raynor into signing those papers. He threatened him, told him he would ruin him if he didn't comply. Jedediah was a good man, and Silas Harding drove him to his death." A wave of murmurs erupted in the room. Mrs. Abernathy's testimony was a turning point. She was a respected figure in the community, a woman known for her honesty and integrity. Her words carried weight. Harding's composure finally cracked. He slammed his fist on the table, his face contorted with rage. "You're all fools. You're believing the lies of a madman and a meddling schoolteacher." "The only fool here is you, Harding," Ellie said, her voice ringing with conviction. "You thought you could get away with your crimes, that you could silence the truth forever. But you were wrong. The truth always comes out, eventually." Seeing the tide turn against him, Harding made a desperate move. He lunged across the table, grabbing the ledges from the council members' hands. "This evidence is false. It's all a lie." He tore at the pages, ripping them into shreds. Jack reacted instantly, leaping over the table and tackling Harding to the ground. A scuffle ensued, the two men wrestling for control of the remaining ledgers. The council members and townspeople surged forward, trying to break up the fight. In the chaos, Ellie saw an opportunity. She grabbed the torn pieces of the ledgers and began gathering them, determined to salvage what she could. Finally, the sheriff intervened, pulling Jack off Harding and placing him under arrest. As Harding was led away, his face a mask of defeated fury, he glared at Jack and Ellie. "This isn't over," he spat. "You haven't heard the last of me." But Ellie knew, as she looked around at the faces of the townspeople, at the glimmer of hope in their eyes, that Harding was wrong. It was over. The truth had been spoken, the silence broken. Redemption had finally found its voice.